All right, we're going holding by the Book of Leviticus Chapter 18. Again, we're going holding by the Book of Leviticus Chapter 18. We are in still in verse 4. Again, this part, I think, 41. It'll be part 42, 43. Takes a while to get through this. Again, we're going holding by Book of Leviticus Chapter 18, verse 4. Torah says, it's Mishpatai, Tasu, Vesukosai, Tishmaru, Aleches Behem, Ani Hashem Elokeichem. So here the Torah says that you shall do my judgments, keep my ordinances, things that don't make sense, to walk therein. I am the eternal, your God. Right? So, spoke last week, still Kliyakar, probably finishes up today. And we spoke last week that the Kliyakar here says, he was talking about trampling on seemingly easy mitzvahs, right? That was what we spoke about. And basically, we mentioned how basically every mitzvah, even a positive command, let's say, eat matzah, put on tefillin, keep Shabbos, whatever it may be. So we mentioned that there's no positive command. The Rabbeinu Yonah says in Shari Tshuva, the third gate, the Rabbeinu Yonah says there's no positive command in the Torah that is not relevant to resurrection of the dead. Right? In other words, a person may think, okay, there are mitzvahs we know that are death penalty, right? If you do them, there, a number of mitzvahs like that. They're more severe mitzvahs or transgressions, let's say better. Transgressions for a person to do, they're, less severe, again, depending on, what the punishment is. But as we mentioned, some will say, okay, so I didn't do this mitzvah. For a guy, let's say he didn't put on tefillin today. Not that he never put on tefillin, right? He didn't put on tefillin today, big deal. So a person will say, okay, so he didn't do it, not under onus. Wasn't beyond his control. Yeah, he was lazy, right? Bottom line, person was lazy. Okay, right? Says Rabbeinu Yonah, it's no mitzvah not dependent on the resurrection of the dead. So we spoke about trampling on, quote unquote, lighter mitzvahs. So Rabbeinu Yonah, then the Kliyakar here continues, and he says over here, the beginning of the verse, it says, it's mishpatai tasu, you should do these commands that I do understand. V'yez chukosai tishmeru, in laws that I don't understand, i.e., let's say the laws of kashrus, the red heifer, good example. Laws that are not rational, right? Do not make rational sense. Yeah. What does the Torah say after that? The Torah says, Tishmeru. You should guard them. Right? So here the Kliyakar says that when the Torah mentions a chok, uses the word chok or chukos or chukosai, laws that do not make logical sense, it's always followed by the words, the word for to guard, right? Tishmur. The word shmira. Literally, the root of the word is shamor or shin mem resh, right? So it says every time you see the word chok, i.e., a law that does not make sense, the next word next to it will be shmira. Right, some form of the word for to guard against. Why? The Kliyakar says, again, if you go through the entire Torah, this is the case every single time. So why? Why should the word, Tishmaru, Shmira, Shamor, whatever the form of the word is, why should the word Shmira for guarding be after the word Chok? Or chukosai, or chukos, or whatever. So says the Kliyakar. Kliyakar here says, anything that potentially could destroy. right? Talking about destroy a person and, let's say, spirituality, for instance. That needs extra guarding, right? Definitely needs extra guarding. As we saw before, right? He brings down from the verse in the book of Exodus, chapter 12, verse 25. On the verse, it says over there, Shmartem es avodah. You have to guard this avodah. You have to guard this thing, right? Whatever it may be. You have an obligation to guard it. You have to watch over it. Be careful. So he says, based on that, someone who's evil, what does he want to do? He wants to uproot all that is holy, right? That's his goal, to make everything like him, or potentially have negative influence over here. He says so too. When it comes to laws we don't understand, you need extra guarding, right? Extra guarding, the person stop, think, what they're doing, or put up boundaries, right? Even better, put up boundaries so a person doesn't come to sin. Now, very interesting that he's talking about laws that don't make sense. Now, laws that don't make sense, Rashi, others bring down, what happens in the world? If non-Jews, secular Jews will say, come on, come to the red heifer, right? Rashi brought it down over here. Rashi says, what does it mean to keep my ordinances? He says, these are the decrees of the king. There's no reason being stated, right? It's only against the evil inclination, right? The evil inclination is going to raise objections and say, why should we observe them? Right? Against the nations of the world. They'll raise objections. They'll say, why can't you eat pig? Why can't you wear shatnez, mixture of wool and linen? What about the red heifer? And what's the answer? Because God said do it. Right? I'm the Lord your God. God said to do it. Very good. So Rashi there says you're not at liberty to evade the obligation. Right? For the whole world. Not that we necessarily care. Right? But the whole world's going to say, what are you doing these things for? So a person will answer, pig is probably very tasty, but what can I do? My Father in heaven says I can't eat it. Yeah, so let's say, come on, it doesn't make sense, right? It's not logical. It's not logical, as we would say, right? Why not? Why not? Because you'll tell me, okay, in order to be a kosher animal, what do you need? I need to chew its cuds and split hoof. So there are a handful of animals that either have one or the other, right? You got pig, you got camel, you got certain types of rabbits, right? Whatever it is, but there's only a certain number that have one or the other, right? One or the other character traits doesn't really matter because you need both. If you don't have both, then you're not allowed to eat this. You're not allowed to eat this animal. So the nations will say that. Secular Jews will say the same thing. They're like, why would you keep it? Why would you bother? It doesn't make sense. Who cares about wool, wearing wool and linen? It doesn't mean it's not an answer per se. We gotta, try and understand the best of our ability. But at the end of the day, what does Rashi say? Why do you keep it? Even things that don't make sense? Because Ani, Hashem, Elokei. I am the Lord your God. So basically, shut up and eat the matzah, right? Shut up and don't eat pig, right? Shut up and whatever. Right? That's what you're going to do. That is your obligation. Now, comes on the Kuyaka. And the Kuyaka over here says, but every time you see the word chok, every time you see the word chukos, which means a lot I don't understand, it's always followed by the word of shmira, to guard. What's the reason? Right? What's the reason? He says, because anything that's going to come and destroy, i.e. something spiritual, what does that mean? It means you got to be more careful. You got to be much more careful. Yeah. Now, there are things that a person will say, I don't need the rabbis come make, all these boundaries, and different things and complicated things. And you have so many laws of Shabbos and kashrus and other things. We don't need so many laws. Okay. But they also came up with laws, obviously based on the Torah itself. They didn't make it up themselves, per se. Yeah. That they also came up with laws that a person wants to guard themselves against. Right? In other words, you're going to set up boundaries. You're going to do things where you don't come to sin, right? The Gemara says, certainly the laws of Shabbos, a lot of things. And the laws of Shabbos are rabbinical in nature. The rabbis came along and made a fence around the Torah. They made a fence around the Torah. They're basically anything similar to what was done in the Mishkan and the tabernacle, right? Anything done in the tabernacle, would be a Torah prohibition, right? In the laws of Shabbos. Anything similar to that could be a Torah prohibition, probably an offshoot. So probably a rabbinic prohibition. And why did they make so many rabbinic prohibitions? In order a person will not come to a more severe transgression. Yeah, they won't come to a Torah prohibition, right? Not only that they keep doing, similar things, and even if it's not forbidden, necessarily it's going to come where you will not enjoy Shabbos. You'll be doing all these other things, and Shabbos won't be Shabbos, right? Shabbos will be like any other day. Right? So they came and made boundaries, around Shabbos, kashrus, morality, in general. In order that what? In order that person should not come to transgress a more severe, prohibition. So the question comes up also, and we've spoken about this somewhere before. I'll just mention that in the workforce, persons out there in the world, right? There can be certainly modesty issues. Some people will be very careful. They will never call a person of the opposite sex by the first name. If they work, let's say, in a religious place, they'll call them Rabbi so-and-so or Mr. so-and-so, right? Never call them by the first name. Now, some people say, come on, it's too formal. You work, let's say you're working with non-Jews or whatever. So you can't always do that, but you put up boundaries, right? Now, why do you put up boundaries? Now, you got to deal with people, obviously. But you don't want to get, so friendly, so to speak. They say, how are you? Very good. You keep it relatively professional, in general, but things can spill over. People get comfortable with each other. They, work many hours together, different projects, different things. One thing can lead to another. You say, come on, the person's married, or let's say even if they're not, they'll have boundaries. Okay, they should have boundaries. It's not like things can never come up, and things, cannot happen because, even let's say in the best of marriages, what can happen? Whenever a person's down, a person's going through difficulty, someone helps pick them up, they get more friendly. I'm not saying anything necessarily is going to happen. Could happen. Something could happen in theory if you're not careful. So, boundaries. And what happens if you don't have boundaries? Oh, that'll never happen to me. Right? So we always say, Al tiftach pe l'satan. You never open your mouth, to Mr. S. Oh, this will never happen to me. There are stories where even by, let's say a person has, siblings, and, siblings are married. So a person got to be careful with their sibling spouse. I guess, like, come on. With my brother's wife, you think really anything's going to happen, and they have kids and this and that. Things have happened. Right? Things have definitely happened. So a person got to be careful. Person has to have boundaries. Person like, come on. So, you're blowing smoke over here. It's all far-fetched. Not far-fetched. Totally not far-fetched. These are things potentially. God gave strongest urge, right? Strongest urge to be, what do you think? Person's, okay, it's a sister-in-law, it's a brother-in-law, this, that. When a person gets married, they have, no feelings for anybody else, right? Really, they shouldn't. Someone of the opposite sex in general, but, that mean all of a sudden, that just goes out the window? I don't think so. Person's got to be careful. Things can happen. Things have happened. right? It's not, even if a person will say, "Oh, it's not very common." You're right. Probably not so common, right? Probably not so common. But it happens, right? Even if it's a relatively small, even if it's a relatively small percentage, right? It can happen, right? I'll give one example. Someone told a story. Somebody meets on a plane, and whatever the story was that this guy meets on the plane. It's kind of like, this guy was like learning. This guy keeps like, looking over, to see, see what he's learning, whatever. So they start to like have a conversation now. Um, and then, this Orthodox Jew sees like, he's got this tattoo, on his arm, right? And whatever, there's a whole story here. So he asked him about it, and where the story goes, because the person who was black, says that his name was Shah. That was his name. It's like, what do you mean? Your name was, your name was, Shah. Whatever. And he had something else. He had a verse. He had a verse like tattooed on his arm. Yeah. So like, he asked him about it, and he said, well, like a lot of things about this, what this guy was telling him, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense, right? It didn't really add up. And he said, well, if you want, you can call my father. My father will tell you the story. So, so whatever, he gets this guy's number, calls him up afterwards, and so he asked him, I met this guy in the plane, he says his name is Shah, and he's got this verse on his arm, and this and that. It's like, what's the story? Like, what's going on? So, so he told him the following story. He was learning. This guy was Jewish and was an Orthodox Jew. Was learning in Panovich Yeshiva, one of the top yeshivas, in Bnei Brak. And at that time, the head of the yeshiva was Rav Shach, of blessed memory. He was the Gadol Ador, greatest rabbi of the last generation, according to everybody. Nothing to talk about. And the student was having difficulty financially, but he was married, and a lot of kids, and struggling financially. And he went to see Rav Shach, and he said, "I found a job. I still learn most of the day, and it's a job at night. It's a job at night. So I want to take this job. It'll help me make extra money, and make my life a lot easier." So he says, "Oh, there's an issue though." So Rav Shach asked him, "What's the issue?" Right? So he asked him, "What's the issue?" And he said, "Well, I'm there at night. I'm the only one there. And there's not Jewish woman who comes and cleans, like, cleans this office, a whole bunch of other offices, So the problem with being alone, right? But he said, I'm working, I'm working most of the day, happily married, have a whole bunch of kids. This woman's African American, like, whatever, or whatever, she's black." And he said, he says like what connection am I ever gonna have? What connection would I ever have such a person? Yeah, I'm Jewish. I'm learning shit, I'm learning, I'm married many years, many kids, blah, blah, blah. It's like, what could happen? So Shach told them it's forbidden. He said, you're not allowed. It's problem yichud. It's problem, being alone with someone, the opposite sex. There's no one around, right? No one can walk, maybe you can tell me, oh, there are people walking in and out all the time. They don't have a problem ever being alone. You don't have that. There's no permissibility here. No permissibility, Rav Shach told. So he says, "I really need the money, and this is very hard. I have this job. It's certainly going to help me." So Shach took out a Shulchan Aruch, took out the Code of Jewish Law. So Rav Shach showed him and read word for word what it said, right? right? Word, word for word what it said. And again, this guy tells him, like, come on, there's really no connection. I'm never going to have a connection to this person. We're two different worlds, whatever. And Rav Shach, like, slammed his hand on the Gemara, on the Shulchan Aruch, and he screamed at him. And he said, what do you think? You know better than the rabbis? You think they don't know anything? They don't know the nature of man? He says, like, you think you know better? He says, it's awesome. It's forbidden. He says, 100% forbidden. There's no permissibility. There's no permissibility. Yeah. That was it. That was the end of the conversation. So this person said, I really need the money. He took the job. He didn't listen. He took the job. So whatever. He's doing whatever he's doing. This woman comes in, this woman's coming in cleaning, whatever. Whatever it is. He's working. She's coming, she's coming in, coming out, this, that. They strike up a conversation, just to be nice, I guess. Strikes up a conversation. Conversation, let's say gets more intense, let's say. And he ends up having a relationship with this woman, divorces his wife, has a relationship with this woman, and this guy who was on the plane was a son of this union. So he couldn't pronounce his name. His name was really Shach. That was his name. He named him after Rav Shach, because obviously he understood, he was right, but he couldn't pronounce it, so he just said Shah. Like, that was his name. Like, the whole, that part of the story, whatever, didn't make any sense. Now the whole thing makes sense. Now the whole thing makes sense. Now, someone will say, come on, that's a one in a lifetime story. Could be. Could very well be one in a lifetime story, but it happened. It happened. Now, a person's going to say, come on, person's Asian, person's Hispanic, person's black, doesn't matter, right? You're going to say, person's married, right? Or even if they're not married, it doesn't really matter, right? Then it just makes it worse. Yeah, what connection am I going to have to such a person? Not that they're bad people. Yeah, what connection are you going to have to such a person? Two different cultures, two different worlds. Two different worlds. All together. What can possibly go wrong? Right? What can possibly go wrong? Everything. Everything. Yeah? And this is what happened. Right? And there are many, many stories of people that, a guy or a woman comes to convert. Now, why are they interested in conversion? Now, many get it, want to convert because they want to convert. Came out of Christianity, came out of, any other religion, or looking for a meaningful way of life, whatever it may be. But there are people get interested in Judaism because they're dating somebody Jewish. Now, someone told me in a certain basin, they get a lot of people, a lot of Israelis when they go to the States. Yeah, the only connection, see, here in Israel, it's a lot easier. Everyone's more or less the same, right? You have religious Jews, non-religious Jews, whatever it may be, but the culture's all around you. Once you leave Israel, right, if you're an Israeli, let's say, where does the strength of being a Jew come from? Synagogue. That's where it is. That's the main place, the synagogue. Here you got synagogues dime a dozen. Some synagogues have rabbis there, they don't have rabbis there, whatever, but you're surrounded by it. Outside of Israel, you got to fight for it, right? Israel not necessarily used to like fighting for their religion, so to speak. So what happens if they're not so strong religiously? What so happens? They intermingle, with other people, any other people. They end up being with non-Jews, right? Like in Israel, it wouldn't happen in general, even though there is an intermarriage problem. Let's say you got, a lot of non-Jewish Russians here. You got a problem with Romanians also, had some of their, lived in certain, neighborhoods and Jews were marrying them also. But in general, intermarriage is like, I would say, almost non-existent here. There are horrific stories where you have women married to Arabs living in Arab towns. here. I just read a story about that recently, about someone whose daughter finally came back 20 years later. A bunch of her kids, now interested in looking into Judaism, a bunch of them radicalized. I think half are interested, in Judaism, the other half I think is still in the Arab village, with the father, and totally radicalized. So like, anyway, whatever. It's a heart-wrenching story. It was a very heart-wrenching story because it's not like, this person had issues and they were going off and other things. It's something that happened. It's something that happened, and nothing happens in a vacuum, obviously, but it wasn't, if someone's really strong, yeah, wait, why are you going to talk to an Arab for? What would some of them can be very charismatic, very this and that, and but these type of relationships usually are for people that are whatever they're struggling with their religiosity, struggling, with another things. They make them feel good, give them a lot of gifts and this and that and whatever, and they end up being with an Arab. Right, but they're Leva Achim is a kind of missionary, certainly a kind of missionary group, but they also do a tremendous amount of outreach, Jewish outreach. They've said there are tens of thousands of Arab kids, adults, whatever, that are Jews, because you have all these Jewish women married to Arabs that live in Arab villages. Now, some of them get out, some of them are actually, able to get out. And some are like stuck there, but like you're talking thousands. It's not, it's not a new phenomenon. It's going on for years. It's going on for many, many years. I just happened to read a story recently, about, a case like this. And it took this woman 20 years, finally got out and whatever. And whatever, it's a heart-wrenching, it's a heart-wrenching story. But it's much more common, than people think. But this organization, Lev Lachim, has really been at the forefront of this for years, for many, many years. Trying to get Jewish women out of Arab villages. I mean, it's a horrific problem. It's not whatever. It's not just like a handful here, a handful there. You're talking thousands, thousands of women married to Arabs. And the kids obviously are Jewish, but the irony is, you can have, these kids or whatever, or to become adults, fighting, attacking Israelis, and really it's Jew against Jew. It just so happens they're Jewish. I mean, 100% they're Jewish, and their father's an Arab, right? So they can be, radicalized. But it's not a small problem. Definitely not a small problem. But in general, the point over here is that if you don't have boundaries, and I personally can't say in this case, they can't say, oh, these things never happen. This is like 1 in a million. The case with, Israeli women being stuck in Arab villages, that's not a small problem. That's not like, 1 in a million, right? It's a much more common problem. Much more common problem. So these other things you tell me what can happen is, so why do I bring it up? Because a lot of times these Israelis not so strong. They go to America, let's say, or go to other places, but let's use America as an example. They go to America, they want to, fit in, American culture. They meet all types of different people. What do you think? Non-Jews going to come along? They're attracted. They strike up a conversation like, all of a sudden, oh, sorry, you're not Jewish, whatever, whatever. They're weak. They're weak in general. They don't have Torah behind them per se, But so it's based and told me that's one of the most common scenarios where a Jew's with a non-Jew, and they want the non-Jew to convert. Yeah. Now, converting for the sake of marriage, obviously forbidden, right? But at the same time, if they want the person to convert, okay. They themselves have to be Orthodox Jews. Now, what I hear also is that that they'll say, yeah, like whatever, a non-Jewish woman will tell me, And I've heard this a number of times. A number of times. Yeah. A number of times that, yeah, they're dating, living with, married to an Orthodox Jew. Now, what's the $1 million question? An Orthodox Jew is married to a non-Jew, there's no conversion, right? Right? There's no conversion. So, like, how's the person Orthodox, right? If they're non-Jew, it's not a problem. As we always say. Not even a problem necessarily putting a stumbling block in front of someone, right? It's not their issue for a Jew every time they're intimate to Torah prohibition, right? It's not the non-Jew's problem. But this comes up over and over and over again, right? I hear this all the time ad nauseum. Yeah, that people say, well, I met this Orthodox Jew. I was like, well, how Orthodox could he be, if he's with you? No offense. Very good at ticking people off, but I was like, no offense. But how can that be? Right? And this based in it, again, I don't think it's an isolated issue in one place, right? In other words, someone, you have an Israeli with a non-Jew, and they want the non-Jew to convert. Yeah, it's very common. Because once you get outside of Israel, everything you have to fight for your Judaism. In Judaism, what does Judaism revolve around? Synagogue. That's where everything happens, right? Prayer, festival, all kinds of things happen in synagogue. Classes, whatever, right? Everything happens there. So if everything happens there, you got to fight for it. If you live in a place, maybe not so many Jews as that, but Israelis stick out. They find each other all over. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. But someone told me, someone that's based and told me, in that place, it's very common. It's very common. It's probably, I'm not going to say half the people that want to convert are like this. But he told me it's like 20, 30%. I mean, it's a high percentage. It's not a small percentage. Now, what's the reason? What would be the reason for such a thing? Because once you leave, and everyone around you is Jewish, it's very easy. What happens when people around you aren't Jewish? So do you put up barriers? Well, if you're not religious or so religious, let's say, you're not going to put up barriers. So what happens when you don't put up barriers? Sorry, I don't have to hang out with you more, but what can I do? You're not Jewish, you're not Jewish. I'm sorry to tell you, I'd have to spend more time with you, but religion is very important to me. Like, come on. Obviously, it's not, right? But a lot of times, the non-Jew helps bring the Jew back, which is not a bad thing. It's just coming, it's coming through the back door, so to speak, right? In other words, it wasn't the Jew that was getting stronger first. That's not what happened, right? Just the opposite. And usually is the case. I shouldn't say usually, but there are cases where the non-Jew, maybe wasn't necessarily thinking of converting, or there are cases where they were, they were going to convert, anyway, regardless of whether they met someone, they just happened to meet someone, and whatever. It's a common problem. It's a very common problem, and I don't think it has to do with where a person lives, right? Whether they live in the Northeast, in the Southwest, in the States, or they live, wherever. The Pacific Northwest, they live in California. I don't know. It's a common problem everywhere. Everywhere it's a problem. Right? Everywhere is a problem. Right? So say, I met this Orthodox Jew. I was like, so where'd you meet him? Or where'd you meet her? Yeah. There's no Orthodox. What happened? Yeah. I spoke to someone, whatever, a while ago, a number of months ago. Maybe last year. Someone tells me, okay, give me a little bit of background. And they say they're modern Orthodox, then okay. So then I don't have so many claims because they claim, they claim to be more modern, but like things they let in their lives because again, things can happen. You don't have barriers. You're not as strong, so to speak. They could say, well, this person's really strong, and this is really what they want, and blah, blah, blah. And my answer always is, well, if they're going to convert, then they know you're in the picture. They're basically going to say, like, you can't have anything to do with each other. It really shouldn't speak to each other. This and that'd be easier if you're married, right? Then they'll try bring, it is easier, but it's a major red flag, right? It's a huge red flag, right? If they were going to convert anyway, in general, regardless, okay, right? So that's one thing. That's one thing, but it looks as English would say, it looks dodgy, right? It looks dicey over here, Yeah, it's a major red flag because they're gonna ask you like one of the things they ask you on an application, right? They're gonna ask you marital status or whatever, family status, right? They ask you if you're dating anyone, whatever. So like that gets complicated. Yeah, it's a major red flag. Can't lie. They'll find out. If they find out, they'll never convert you, right? Because then you lied, right? So either you hide it very well, or you got to tell the truth over here because Basin has a lot of responsibility, right? The critical court has a tremendous amount of responsibility, but it's a very common thing, right? It's a very common. It's a very common thing. Now it makes perfect sense if you don't have barriers. It makes sense. And if you're not that religious, it certainly makes sense. Yeah. But at the same time, that person, that Jew has to, he has to come around also, or she has to come around, and be an Orthodox Jew. Now, some already are, let's say they may be more modern or whatever, but they keep Shabbos, they keep kosher, this and that, but at the end, at the end of the day, it's a major red flag, right? Right? It's a major red flag, right? Absolutely major red flag. Someone says Trump's not a converter while dating Jared Kushner. Okay, but he was more modern, right? Now you tell me someone's more modern, I don't ask any questions because I understand the mentality. I understand the mentality. Yeah, they also go to football games. They also do other things, right? So good. So they want to call themselves Orthodox. Okay, yeah, you know, uh, then call themselves what they want. At the same time, if you understand the person's more modern, so the values are different. Yeah, the values are very different in many ways. Yeah, I'm not going to say, they don't keep Shabbos. They don't keep kosher. They have their own standards of what they do. But keep in mind, the question that comes up with her, right? The question that comes up with her is she doesn't cover her hair. Yeah, and she wears short sleeves. You know, so somebody asked me, I get this question a lot, actually. People ask me, what about Trump's daughter? So the joke, what's the difference between Trump and a Reform rabbi? You say, yeah, what's the difference? Well, Trump's grandkids are Jewish. I mean, it's a sad joke. I told someone that poor, they were on the floor. It's probably because they were toasted, and they were drunk. The other person fell off his chair when I said that. Right? So it could be just humoring me or it totally was placid, probably both. But in either case, the question came up, because it's come up a number of times, that, she doesn't cover her hair. She wears short sleeves. Yeah. Somebody said she's not modest. Okay. Right? So how can the conversion be good? Isn't that a rebellion? Isn't that saying, I'm going to convert, except I'm not going to keep kosher? Or except I'm not going to cover my hair? Or except I'm not going to do this, that, and the other thing? So that the conversion should be thrown out the window. So why is her conversion good? Right? Let's say, why is it good? What's the what would I think? Because that's their standard. In that community, in a modern Orthodox community, certainly not all women cover their hair. And even if they do, they don't cover all their hair. Someone asked me once, they were a certain community, and they said, I see these women cover their hair with the baseball cap, but 3/4 of the hair is hanging out. They said, how is that considered covering your hair? So I said, there's an opinion that if a married woman, we're talking about a married woman, yeah, that if she covers her hair and part of her hair comes out, yeah, tefach, which is like a hand's breadth, right? Like a fist, right? If some hair comes out, okay, not the end of the world. But nobody says you should leave it like that. You should start out that way. Yeah. So I told them I got a great idea. I said, in a nice way, ask them. Go ask them and said, if the halacha is that you're supposed to cover your hair. Yeah. Yeah. If the halacha is you're supposed to cover your hair, right? If the halacha is you're supposed to cover your hair, why is your hair a quarter covered? Why is it a third covered? Now, again, in that community, it has nothing to do with money. This has nothing to do with money. That's the standard. Now, if that's the standard, then she's not doing it to be rebellious. She's doing it because that's what they do in that community. Yeah. But it goes against halach in general that you have to have your hair covered. Very good. Very good. I didn't take a survey on how many, modern Orthodox women cover their hair properly. Now, there are some that do. I'm not going to say they don't. There are some that do. But there are plenty that don't. Yeah. In an ultra-Orthodox community, whether you wear a wig or you wear a snoot, let's say you wear a beret, whatever it is, the hair is covered. Their hair is usually fully covered. You'll never, by Sephardic women, you'll never see hair uncovered. Again, maybe you got some that are a little more modern, this and that, but in an ultra-Orthodox community, you can say what you want about wigs, that's not the topic, right? But in an ultra-Orthodox community, you'll never see that. You might see women sometimes, let's say wear wigs that are too long. That's a problem. They may wear clothes that may be a little bit too tight, okay. Yeah. But to have most of their hair uncovered, you won't see. You won't see. So you say, well, some do like this, some do like that, whatever. You won't see it, right? Any community I've ever been in, except the modern Orthodox community, yeah, you will not see that in general. In general. But in this case, it's not that money talks. Yeah, basins can be bought. That's true. Basins can be bribed, right? I'm not gonna, deny that. There are basins that can be bribed or whatever. But this is not the case that has to do with money. What this has to do with is that's the standard. If that's the modern Orthodox standard, she didn't do anything wrong. It has nothing to do with who she is. She took on mitzvahs. She keeps Shabbos. Yeah? You might tell me she doesn't dress modestly. Okay. Yeah? Maybe she does other things that she probably shouldn't do. Okay. Yeah? It doesn't mean she didn't take on the mitzvahs properly. Yeah? It doesn't mean when she doesn't cover her hair or she wears, she wears short skirts or, her sleeves aren't covered or it's got a V-neck or whatever, letting it all hang out. Yeah? No pun intended. That doesn't mean the conversion's not valid, right? But there are plenty of plenty of women in the modern Orthodox community dress like that. That's how they dress. I'm not gonna say everybody, right? That I get the modern Orthodox community come and throw me under the bus. I'm not saying everybody. There are plenty fine, religious women, modern Orthodox women that dress properly, cover their hair, the way they should, however they cover their hair, doesn't matter, right? There are those that do. Okay, I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about others, that they don't dress appropriately, right? Either they don't dress appropriately or they don't cover their hair as well, right? Let's say it's a problem, right? It's a problem. So, it's irrelevant. Again, someone says, "Wow, someone's able to convert and not do so many things because they have money." Yeah, that's a problem. That I would agree is a problem, right? It could be because we're, well, listen, he was very wealthy before he married her. Yeah, so, but whatever, he's more modern. It's much more modern. Okay, she's much more modern, right? And he was also he was very modern. Okay, that's not surprising. That's totally not surprising. Yeah. So, could it be money talks? Yeah, it could be. But again, if that's the standard in that community, that has nothing to do with money. They just have a lower standard. How can they convert someone if they're not going to cover their hair? Now, if you tell me they didn't know about covering their hair, this is a case that someone came in front of my Rebbe once after he gave class, and he said there's a woman that converted and she had difficulty covering her hair after conversion and want to know if the conversion is invalid. Now, so Rabbi said, very simple, no. It's not invalid because not everyone's going to know, everything about conversion before they convert and what it means to be a Jew. But, if she would have said, yeah, I'm never going to cover my hair ever after conversion, that's a problem. If it's hard for them, okay, that's a different issue. right? That's the different issue. So I told him tongue in cheek, I said, well, if they would have been in my class or something, they would have known. It's like, okay, whatever. So I was like, no, it's, you can't do that. People have to know. It's like, all right, I got the point. Like, all right, I got the point. Yeah. But that's not a merit. That's not called a rebellion. She didn't know. And it's hard for her to do it now. That's a totally different issue. But if you're going to set a standard, you're going to set the bar very low. And that's the bar for most people. When they do that, then you can't say that the conversion is valid. Right? You can tell me, they're too lenient, other things, okay. You can tell me a lot of different things. But if that's the standard, and that's what they do, it doesn't matter about money. That's their standard. It's a low standard. I don't think it's good. People that do that and whatever. But it doesn't mean the conversion is invalid, right? Does not mean the conversion is invalid. Listen, Basin also has responsibility. They also have to have a backbone. There's a Basin here that someone who was a famous rapper wanted to convert, very sincere, but he wanted to rap what he wanted to rap. And the Basin said, like, no, you want to do it in a different way. You want to do like, Nissan Black, what he does, whatever. Okay, but you're not going to do what you did before. We're not going to sanction it. We cannot put our name on something and make us look bad. Say, oh, look, this is one of the converts, and he's like, selling out the stadium, 50,000 people and cursing left and right like a truck driver. Right? That's pretty bad. No matter how much money this guy has. This guy had a lot of money, plenty of money. Yeah. This Basin did not convert them. Right? This Basin in Bnei Brak did not convert him. Right? So a friend of mine, who was working with this guy, comes and says, don't worry, someone will. Someone will convert this person. Right? I mean, they are sincere. It's not like they're not sincere, but there's a major problem. There's a major problem. One of the things Basin wanted to test the person on is, are they going to listen to what they say? Right? And that's a big thing. That's a big thing. So I took someone to this Basin in Bnei Brak many years ago, and it was a little bit before Rosh Hashanah. So the Basin asked them, if we tell you have to move to a stronger community, what would you do? Said, we'll do whatever the Basin says. Right? If we have to move, we have to move. Right? They say, this community's not strong enough, and tell us where we should go or whatever. That's what we'll do. Then the Basin asks them, okay, it's coming up to Rosh Hashanah. What if we tell you, you have to wait till after Sukkot. So you have to go through, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and all through Sukkot, as a non-Jew. So their answer was the same. The answer was, whatever you tell us to do, we're not going anywhere. Like, we've been through this for a long time. This is the way we want to live our lives. Whatever the Basin says, that is what we're going to do. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, that is what the Basin wants to hear. That's the answer. In other words, you are mishabed yourself. You're like a slave to them in a certain way. Not literally. But you're going to listen to what they say. Whatever they tell you to do, that's what they... and if a person bucks them, because they're the ones calling the shots, but if a person bucks them and says, I'm going to do what I want, I don't care what you have to say, that's a major red flag. That is a major red flag. Not saying you can't ask them questions, other things. You got to show respect. They're taking huge responsibility. They're signing off. They're putting their John Hancock, so to speak, on this, on this conversion. So if anything goes wrong or whatever, they get the responsibility. It's a huge responsibility. Now again, there are different standards. Some people have, some rabbinical courts have higher standards. Some have less standards. Some, unfortunately, have very little standards. Okay. Right? But again, if there were 3 kosher Jews on the Basin and they took on the mitzvahs or whatever, and they intention to keep the mitzvahs, not that they were lying, in most cases, it'd be a valid conversion. The question is going to be, what happens if somewhere down the line that they don't keep Torah mitzvahs anymore? Then there's the question, what happened at the conversion? Yeah. If you see right afterwards someone's not keeping Torah mitzvahs, that's a problem. Right? That would certainly call into question the conversion. Yeah. What happens if it's 6 months later, a year later? Yeah. So the answer would be, if the conversion's valid, let's say the conversion was valid. So if the conversion was valid, then what? Then we say it's like a Jew went off. Right? It's like a Jew that went off the derech, right? They were religious and then they went off. That would be the same case. Yeah. But if it's straight after, and it's not so simple either, right? But let's say it'd be straight after someone converted, right after they converted, what happened? They didn't keep Torah mitzvahs. I know a few cases like this, and they never had intention to keep Torah mitzvahs, right? And basically they lied to the basis. So that's the big problem. That, in that case, that converts probably not valid because they never had intention to take on anything. They did it, they went through the motions or whatever, but they never really had intention. Yeah, since they didn't have intention, and you see straight away that was the case, that's probably not valid, right? But you have to evaluate. Each case, right? It's not so simple. You got to evaluate each case. But again, the bottom line is, if somebody, if there's a base that, let's say, has a much lower standard, yeah, like in this case, I don't think every modern Orthodox base is like this, but let's say in this case, yeah, they didn't care about what they wore so much. Yeah, they want to make sure, okay, the person's going to wear a skirt, very good. They weren't so stringent on 3/4 sleeves, right? They weren't so stringent, maybe on a V-neck or whatever. Okay. Maybe they weren't so stringent that she has to cover her hair. I don't know, right? You have rabbinical courts like that. You can say, how can it be good or whatever? Okay, it's a different issue, but that's their standard. If that's their standard and they have 100% intention to convert, that's a good conversion. It's not a question, oh, I didn't know this. That is their standard. Right now, if they want to look into further, they want to be more religious, yeah, they'll change. If they want to stay the way they are, whatever, okay. Yeah, but that's the norm. That 100%, that's the norm. You can have people, I'll give an example. You can have people, by the Sudas Mafsekis before Yom Kippur, they're sitting down to their meal, watching a ball game. Now I'm gonna say, come on, it's right before Yom Kippur. It's a couple of hours before Yom Kippur. You're gonna go to synagogue, Kol Nidre, you'll be in synagogue for like 2-3 hours. Yeah. And what did you do during the meal right before the fast? You're busy watching the game. Now you ask somebody who was there, a friend of mine was like that, and he says there's no contradiction. No contradiction. You're watching the football game as soon as my seconds. What's the problem? Right? You're the best of both worlds. You're eating the meal, you're watching the game. What's the problem? What are you losing out on? You get best of both worlds. They told me, he grew up in the modern Orthodox community. He told me that's the norm for most people. Some people will be more religious, less religious, whatever it is, but that is part of the norm. So you're going to say, that's nuts. It's kind of like going to the mikveh and having a dead rat in your hand. You don't become pure. Yeah, so how can you have both? How can you have both at the same time? So good, everyone will answer for themselves. Right? It's a contradiction in terms. But there are people, again, I'm not going to malign everybody. There are very strong modern Orthodox communities, in the world. I'm not going to say not. There are, but you have a lot of people, business people, other things, whatever, and they don't have any problem going to ball games. They don't have any problem doing other things. Watching movies. They don't have an issue. They have no issue. Some will have an issue for sure. Yeah, others don't have an issue. So why is that not a major contradiction? That's who they are. That's the standard in their community. It's pathetic, but that's, again, I'm not saying by everybody. But there's a major contradiction there. Major contradiction. But in either case, if that's the standard, of the Beis Din, then basically you can't say that the conversion goes out the window, right? And the reason you can't say the conversion goes out the window is because they took on the mitzvahs. And because they took on the mitzvahs, even if it's a lower standard, yeah, the rabbis there hopefully knew what they were doing, so it's a proper conversion. So then somebody mentioned, yeah, when they don't want to keep something, they blame the rabbi or rabbinic law. Yeah. I just, listened to a podcast, somebody that, whatever, didn't grow up religious. He gets to yeshiva, whatever. And you talk about Borer, selection during Shabbos. They're like, Borer? Not a Jewish concept. Not what do you mean Borer? Like, if I take out bones from fish, on Shabbos, you want to tell me that's a problem? That's one of these categories, in the laws of Shabbos. I know what Shabbos is. You don't turn on and off lights. You're not allowed to cook. You have to use a hot plate. You have to this. You have to that. Okay. They never heard anything about Borer. Never heard anything about Borer. Oh, come on, you guys are fanatics. Whatever. So my friend tells a story. A guy comes to synagogue, and what are they giving a class on? The laws of Shabbos. Very good. So he's sitting down in this class. And he's learning about Borer. That's the topic. They're learning about all the intricacies of taking the good from the bad, and you take the good from the bad and the good, and whatever. You take it right before the meal. Can you take it with a spoon or with a fork? And all these different things. And he sat there like, I never heard this before. This guy grew up religious, went to yeshiva, never heard this. Never heard anything about this aspect of the laws of Shabbos. And he thinks like okay, they're more right wing. They're more fanatical. Sing a Boer, like, come on. Yeah. So then, short time thereafter, he's in another synagogue. Rabbi's giving a class. What's the topic? Boer. It's like, are these people fanatics? This is an epidemic, right? They're making up the same thing. So I don't, so Rabbi friend was saying, like, a person can grow up, even quote unquote, religiously, and they'll think this is fanatical. This is like, oh, come on, no one's ever heard of this. No one ever does this. Come on, no one does this. So you're right. People will say, it doesn't exist. Rabbi's making it up. He needs a raise, probably does. All these different things. It's a severe prohibition. It's it's funny. I just, mention this, in passing. And that is, it's, in the Gemara itself that speaks about it. It's only like a couple lines, right? It's not very, it's not very detailed. It's not a very detailed discussion, in the Gemara itself. A few places speaks about it, but there are books and books written on this, on this one topic, right? It's very complex, right? One of the more harder, categories of one of the 39 categories, right? On Shabbos, yeah, but. The modern Orthodox world, again, I'm not saying by everybody by any stretch, but there are people that have never learned this, never heard of this. How can you not heard of it? How can no one's ever been taught? This is a basic thing on Shabbos. Well, you're not going to teach about cooking on Shabbos, which happens every week. So you have to know when you're allowed to take it off a hot plate, when you're not allowed to. It doesn't matter if it's wet or it's dry, it's fully cooked, it's half cooked. You have to know how it works. Otherwise, you can be transgressing Torah prohibition, at least. At least the rabbinic prohibition for sure. But, there can be many things that a person transgresses Torah prohibition. Oh, I never heard about it, so it doesn't exist. So just because you never heard about it, did you ever read Encyclopedia Britannica on the subject? Probably doesn't exist anymore. Probably it's only online, right? Okay, they're not going to talk about this, but come on. These are things. If you learn the laws of Shabbos, you always, the Chofetz Chaim says, his introduction to the laws of Shabbos in the third part of the Mishnah Berurah, he says, if you don't, the laws are so complex, if you don't go through them and you don't review them, you will transgress. It's not cursing anyone. You're just saying there's a lot of detail. Yeah. So okay. So a person say, "Oh, I got the basics." Okay, but this you totally miss. And this comes up every week if you don't eat gefilte fish. If you don't eat gefilte fish, let's say you eat salmon. Yeah? You eat salmon. Salmon can have bones. 100% salmon can have bones. Now, so then the question becomes, okay, you eat it with your fork. So what do? You take out the bones so you don't choke on them. Very good. But I just thought, not me, someone just took the bad from the good. So that's forbidden. You're gonna say, but that's the way you eat salmon. Okay. We don't know how to take the bad from the good or the good from the bad. There are ways around it. Very good. There are ways around it. But it's very complex. There are people, like Rabbi Friend mentioned, heard other people say the same thing. They're like, what are you talking about? I grew up religious, I grew up Orthodox, I never heard such a thing. I never heard such a thing. I mean, it's in every Shabbos book. Any halachic book in English, Hebrew, whatever language, it's there, right? There's going to be a major chapter there because it's one of the more complex things, on Shabbos. They say, this must be some stringency no one ever does. I don't know. It's very common. That's one of the reasons you have gefilte fish. Even if people don't like it, right? That's one of the reasons because gefilte fish has no bones. Exactly why people eat gefilte fish. Yeah, if you don't like gefilte fish, okay, but that's one of the reasons because the fish is totally ground up. There are no bones, right? Other fish has bones, so that you got to be careful of. If you can take out some of the bones, some of them are very small. You can't do that. Yeah, so you can't take them out before Shabbos. So you have to know how you're allowed to do it, whatever. But it's very common. Very, very common. So, this guy goes to a second class and talking about the same topic. It's like, oh, this is an epidemic. Come on. This is the ultra religious. They're making these things up, this and that. So you're right. Who are they going to blame? The rabbis. They're going to say they made it much more complex. They don't say anywhere in the Torah about this, right? That's what they're going to say. It's only three things that the Torah says about the laws of Shabbos: not allowed to carry, not allowed to cook, right? Not allowed to kindle a fire. Like that's it. Okay, we know there are other things. What are things I'm allowed to touch? Yeah, or not allowed to touch. Yeah, muksa. Yeah, that's not even a category according to 39. Some didn't even hold a muksa, the Gemara says. Yeah, okay. When it comes up, what am I allowed to touch? Not allowed to touch. This and that people understand. You shouldn't touch a pen, shouldn't touch car keys, shouldn't touch, anything that would be forbidden to touch, in general. Or what about I have something on the wall, I have a picture on the wall. No one's ever going to move it. You have no intention to move it. You don't want it to get damaged. Person has a priceless collection of, I don't know what, whatever, baseball cards, right? Let's say. They don't want it to be moved. They don't want to get damaged. They're worth a lot. Okay. Right? So in that case, you wouldn't be allowed to move it. Okay. Yeah. You say, oh, but it doesn't say anywhere this and that. That's what people say. That's what people complain. But again, I'm not throwing everyone under the bus. Over here, there are plenty of modern Orthodox Jews that, keep Torah the way they should, keep mitzvahs the way they should. And there are others that thinking going to a ball game is a positive command in the Torah. There's no problem. There's absolutely no problem. And there will be synagogues that, during the summer they'll have they'll have a day. They'll go Sunday, whatever. They'll go on a Sunday and they'll take a whole bunch of people and go to the game. Like what's the problem? They don't see anything wrong with it. Again, I'm not saying it's everybody, but it's not a small population. Not a small population. And you can tell me, okay, like being into sports could be the worst thing, right? To my daughter, one of my daughters and son-in-law are dorm counselors and whatever in yeshiva. Yeshiva here in Jerusalem, and these guys are better guys than some other places. I wouldn't say they're as modern, but like you find any of them that are not into sports, it's like crazy. Really not into sports. I was on a bus last year going somewhere, and two guys sitting behind me. The entire conversation it had to be at least half an hour, 40 minutes about sports in New York, different sports teams, this and that. They don't look so modern. Okay. So a person can say, if a person's into that, just, maybe the only thing is, it's a total waste of time, in general or whatever. Okay. You can say that. Maybe the worst things out there. Okay. Yeah. But a person grew up in America not into sports. There are guys, there are some guys, I haven't met too many of them, right? But there are some guys like we're never into sports. They were just never into sports. I hear more by women, women, plenty of women into sports also. But So I was telling someone the story, whatever, last year. I was telling someone the story. I was on the bus. I'm like you're shocked? Like someone told me, it's like, come on, that's something that surprised you? No, it wasn't something that surprised me, right? Definitely wasn't something that surprised me. But that's what people speak about. But I spoke about other things also. I'm not going to mention, but whatever. The main part of the conversation, not that I was trying to listen, but sometimes Americans speak too loud. Yeah, can't imagine who. But in any case, like the whole bus could have heard the whole conversation they were having. I mean, they were speaking pretty loud, right? But the majority of that conversation was about that. And they're giving their own, their own spin on what the team should do with this, and do with this player, do with that player, this, that. If I would have asked them what they were learning, I thought, oh, by the way, guys, what are you guys learning? What tractate are you learning? It's like, oh, spit back me the Gemara. Tell me what the Gemara says. Then Rashi says, tell me what some of the commentators say. Maybe they can spit back some of it. Very good. This they can spit back verbatim. Verbatim. They can tell you stats. They can tell you other things. Yeah, that's important. Okay, the same Torah is also important. Yeah, why do you think I'm in yeshiva for a year? Or 2 years, right? They come here. They get strengthened when they come here. That's the whole purpose of what these yeshivas do, is they strengthen them. In many ways. In many, many ways. To get this garbage out of their heads, very hard. Very, very hard. So I was at a wedding last year. I met the head of yeshiva that, whatever, I used to work with, like, whatever, for a couple of years, just to give some classes there. And I asked them, like, have you seen, like, what they call Euretus Adoris, like generations going down, not going up. Like, the closer you are to Mount Sinai, like, the greater the generation, right? The further away you go from Mount Sinai, it's like, cream puff generation gets worse and worse and worse. Yeah, even people like quote unquote keeping Torah mitzvah. So he's been the head of the small Orthodox yeshiva for many, many years, many, many, many decades, and their goal is to give them a taste of what Torah is and try and make them stronger in their observance. So I asked him, like, have you seen this going down? He said, oh yeah. He said it used to be years ago. What was their biggest fear? Thursday nights, whatever, guys go to town. Right, they go to the center of Jerusalem, hang out with girls, go to pizza places, whatever. Like that was the biggest concern. That was the biggest concern. That's not the biggest concern today. What's the biggest concern? Is a smartphone. That is the biggest concern. So the yeshiva doesn't take it away from them. They don't. Others do. They can't. You get caught, like my son-in-law keeps catch someone with a smartphone and take it away. Yeah, I'll get back to them eventually, but they don't want them having them. Okay. But in general, he said, we take these guys on great trips and during the year and this and that. He said there's some guys. He said there are some guys that won't even get off the bus. They're too addicted to their phone. They're so addicted to their phone. He said, we get this great trip. We're going here, going there. Rock climbing, this, that, whatever. Like, things guys would be interested in doing. Yeah. And like some people, they said, no, I'm just going to stay on the bus. Yeah. And what are they doing on the bus? They're watching whatever they're watching. Yeah. So like they never lose contact. Right. But it's very hard to motivate somebody like that. The phone's attached to the hip. It's like part of them. But he said, he told me, like, it's the hardest thing. You have to come in like sell Torah, like a game show host. You come in with a funny bow tie. It's like, all right, for 100 points, are you gonna, know what Rashi says over here? Like, they have to, imagine you go in, you get these guys take them on like an extreme thing, an extreme hike, this and that. It's like, yeah, it sounds interesting. I'm just gonna, I'm gonna stay in the bus for the next couple hours. He said that's the problem. He said, because, and that's very hard to fight against. Very, very hard to fight against. So, it depends. Like, this she or my daughter, my son-in-law, these are better guys. These are definitely better guys, stronger guys in that sense. They're on the sport. Every last one of them. Some more, some less. Yeah. But, so you say, okay, well, I'm on this rant to say, that should be the worst thing. Yeah, it should be. But it's addictive. And it's sad if the whole point is, learning Torah, living Torah, retaining Torah, and this and that, it's a major distraction. major distraction. And you have sports going on all year round, right? You got then the football season coming up, and then probably another 20 days, 30 days, another month. What are you gonna have? You're gonna have what do you call it? Baseball starting up. Pitchers, catchers come. Then you have the end of the basketball and hockey season, and then you start baseball and stuff like it's a never-ending cycle. If you're into sports, it's a never-ending cycle. But you have other things. Tell someone like why it's so bad to watch a movie. And they don't care. They may say you're right. There's too much violence and it's too much immorality and it's vulgar language, but you know what? I like to watch. Like, I just want to, I just want to veg out, whatever. Destructive. Absolutely destructive. I'm not talking about the secular world. Secular world, yeah, it's a whole different thing. I'm talking about religious kids. Yeah. And this can take a person pretty far. It depends. It depends. How far it goes. So I know somebody that, all right, they were more modern. They were definitely more modern. One kid got into the radio. What was the thing he got into? Back in the day, many, many years ago. Many years ago, got into Howard Stern. Now, if you're gonna get into anyone, I wouldn't say get into him. Yeah, but that was like it was a major spiral, downwards, so to speak. And these things have an effect. They affect how you think, put other images in your mind, different things. So again, sports is like, kind of tame compared to that, unless the person like almost worships the people because, they can throw a ball or kick a ball or, right, who knows what, but they don't care. Nobody cares about that. They'll tell you. I care about, the only thing I care about is how he shoots the ball, or how he kicks it, or how he hits it. Like, what do I care what he does? What do I care what he does in the offseason? What do I care what he does other things? The person's not moral. I understand that, so what? Am I gonna try and live that lifestyle? No. They just want to watch him play. They don't care. They want to see championships. They want to be running around screaming like a madman, saying their team's number one and this and that. Okay. But it's very hard to get out of your system. Very, very hard. So in the secular world, you're totally surrounded by it. I have no question. I have no questions. Yeah, because those are the values. Those are the values given over. 100%. In the religious world, you should have a religious kid, keeping Torah mitzvahs, and that's what they think about. And that's what they're worried about, so to speak. The team won, the team lost, bad calls, not bad calls, this, that, and tell you stats up the gazoo. That's horrific. That's horrific because you can't get them to learn. That's exactly the problem. That's exactly the problem because of all the images and things they see, a lot more interesting than trying to break your head and learn. It's very hard. Yeah. There's no question. And the more a person gets distracted, right, the worse it's going to be. And that's what we said before, back to our topic here, right? I'll take questions now. If you don't put up boundaries, if you don't put up these boundaries, what's going to happen? What's going to happen, right? A person will think, come on, this never happened to me. At the end of the day, a person will say, yeah, I'm only watching a little bit. I'm only this. I'm only that. Yeah, but eventually what happens overcomes a person. Can't overcome a person. So they say, oh, the rabbi said this, the rabbi said that, or whatever. Yeah, but they understood. They understood, being alone with someone of the opposite sex, so no one can come in and come out, or whatever. There's an issue. There's an issue. It's like, oh, what do they know? You take this case. You take this case with with this guy, that basically divorced his wife, and now, is with this other person, and there's a child that they had. And what was the point? First of all, what the name he gave him, and the thing he wrote on his arm, whatever, I guess the verse, whatever it was, that he had tattooed on his arm. To understand, he made a mistake. Yeah, or he changed his life or not. In the end, I don't think anything changed from the story, right? He's probably still with this woman, whatever. But this guy was learning in the top yeshiva in Israel, in the world, one of the top yeshivas in the world. Yeah, and this is what happened. And he says, "I know better." And he says, "I need the money, and I'm going to look the other way." Yeah, I'm going to go against what this says. Rav Shach screamed at him. And Rav Shach said, "What you think you know more than the rabbis do? You think you're more important than them? You don't think they know what they're talking about?" He screamed at him. He said it's absolutely forbidden. He did it anyway. He did it anyway. What was the end result? What was the end result? He got burnt. Totally got burnt. Lost his wife, lost his kids. I don't know what kind of relationship he has with his kids. He's got this woman he's with now. Yeah, cost him. You're gonna say, "Oh, come on," being alone with another person. Like what's gonna happen? Even the person much older or whatever. Like, what do you think is really gonna happen? They understood. This whole chapter, which we haven't gone very far, but this whole chapter about forbidden relationships is that they understood. God understood. These are things you don't mess with. And there's good reasons and strongest urge God gave to a person. But this guy wants to reinvent the wheel. So this guy says, "Oh, come on. What am I going to have connection with this woman? Two totally different worlds. Nothing's ever going to happen. So what if it's late at night and blah, blah, blah. I'm married with kids. Like, we're different. His main argument was we're in two different worlds. Totally different worlds. And never the two shall mesh." Okay. So the inclination said, I think you're kind of weak. You don't know what you're doing. Yeah, and he got suckered in. He got sucked in. And that's what happened. A person's going to think, "Oh, I know better. I know better. This is not going to happen to me, right? This can't apply to me. It apply to other people. Nah, I'm above this. This is not going to touch me." Oh, really? Right? That's what happened. All right, let me take some questions here. Someone asked, "My local synagogue is hosting a Hilchah Shabbat initiative. Can I join it?" Why not? They allow you to join it, you should join it. Getting more information and solidifying a person's knowledge, you never stop. So if they allow you to come, why not? As long as the person teaching knows what they're doing. So yeah, I don't see why not. Someone says maybe Trump's daughter is just still learning. Halavai? Halavai, that would be true. Halavai, that would be true. The problem is, the bar is not, the bar over there is not very high. So if it's not very high, and they're doing the minimum of whatever they need to do, and he himself is an Orthodox Jew and he grew up more Orthodox. Okay. Do they wear a hat on Shabbos? I don't think so. Yeah, does he dress, white and black? No. Okay, so it's more modern. Very good. Very good. There are people that are stronger, that are more modern, people that are weaker, that are more modern, anywhere in between. But I think a lot of them, there is a range now, people in the modern Orthodox community becoming, I would say, more right wing. Yeah. I mean, there's a branch of modern Orthodoxy that's very much to the left. They're almost conservative more than Orthodox. Yeah, so you have a major left wing element, no question about it, and you have a right wing element also, and anywhere in between. But there's an issue. When you let your guard down, this is what happens. And then you justify it. Then you say and they'll make fun of this because they'll say, "What's the big problem about going to a game? What's the biggest problem?" Well, let's say you go to a baseball game. Okay. Way people are dressed, that could be a problem. Way people talk, that could be a problem. So, I mean, at any game, it could be like that. I would say in other ways, let's say by, basketball and hockey, maybe less, because, it's wintertime for most people. So, depending where you live. So maybe that's less of an issue. But what would be the single biggest issue that you could say against them? It's a waste of time. So if it's a woman, doesn't have to learn Torah, okay. For a guy, it's a waste of time. You have to waste. They're not even going to hear it. They're not going to hear it. Some people would say, I don't think a lot of people would, but some people would say, my team wins and they're on top. I pray better. My Judaism is stronger because of it. And I think it's kind of pathetic, but okay. Yeah. Some people may actually say that. I don't think it's a lot of people, but some will say that. Others will say it's no big deal. I can turn it on and off whenever I want. It's very hard to do. It's extremely hard to do. The reason it's extremely hard to do is because, like anything else that's addictive, it's hard to stop. And we can justify and say, look at the rest of the world, look what they're doing and whatever. So okay, this is the lesser of evils. Good? I would 100% agree. It's a lesser of evils. How far does it go? Game 7, NBA championship, your team is playing. What do you do? It's on Shabbos. It's on Shabbos. Yeah? Now, if you have a TV, what's the easy thing you can do? Leave it on. Very good. Get the best of both worlds. But it's not the spirit of Shabbos, obviously. Yeah? Is a person going to desecrate Shabbos to watch it? So you say, I'll put on a timer. I'll do this. I'll do that. You won't desecrate Shabbos. So what's the only thing you can say against that? It's called being menuvel b'reshus haTorah. Menuvel b'reshus haTorah means you're disgusting in God's eyes. That's what it means. That's the best we can say. It's something disgusting in God's eyes. It's not the spirit of Shabbos. Some people make fun of that also. Okay, it's not the spirit of Shabbos. Did I transgress? Technically, certain things maybe, right? But in general, you didn't do anything wrong. Did not do anything wrong. And then someone will definitely say, this is an enhancement to my Shabbos. Okay. And if there's nothing wrong with it, why can't I do it? The person has to put their foot down and say, this is not what you should be doing, even during the week. It's a total waste of time. There are not good values there. Think of a million things. Yeah. But the laws of Shabbos in general, what could I say? What's the worst thing? What's the worst thing? It's a waste of time? They'll say, oh, you're going to say it's a waste of time. Yeah, it is. It's a total waste of time. Watching a movie, total waste of time. Even a documentary, a lot of times. It depends what it is. Yeah, okay. Well, it's a waste of time. Then you got violence, you got immorality, you got vulgarity, you got all these things. All these things. Can't justify that. Some people will. Yeah. Someone says, okay, let's go back here. You can't eat gefilte fish. Okay. Some people, I say it's like a honorary thing. You got to try and eat the gefilte fish with the jelly. They're like, I won't even go near it. So, okay. Yeah, let's say one's uncertain regarding application, applicable law for foods. And a heating device without a rabbi available. Does one leave it to burn? No, you don't leave it to burn. I wouldn't say that. Can you make water? Can you add water? Or not serve or not conserve? It depends what it is. It depends. If you let's say cholent. Cholent is burning on the stove. Yeah, you can't take it off. Right? You're not gonna take it off, right? But it's burning. Right? So you put it far away from the fire as possible. And if you already have hot water, let's say, that is already cooked before Shabbos, I can take the hot water. I'd have to take the cholent pot off. I'd have to take it off the hot plate, let's say, hold on to it, pour hot water, into it. That I could do to make sure it doesn't burn. That you could do. Right? You don't have to leave it there and burn. You can take it off. Right? You certainly take it off. Now, let's say you don't have hot water. Let's say you don't have hot water. Then you're stuck. Right? What if it's burning? You want to put some cold water in it. So then you got a problem. Because if it's cold, you don't put a ton of cold water, what's going to happen? It's going to get cooked. Right? So if you put cold water there, But then you put a lot of cold water there, so it doesn't get cooked, it gets warm. Okay. You put it back on the fire, that's going to cook it. That's a problem. Right? So the thing would be, if you don't have hot water, you can't borrow hot water from somebody, let's say. So then, yeah, I mean, you don't have to let it burn, you can just take it off the fire. You just totally take it off the fire, right? There's nothing else to do. I mean, there's no mitzvah to let it burn, for sure not. You can take it off the fire and leave it off the fire. Then what are you going to eat? Then you got a problem, right? Then you have a problem. If you can't add hot water to it to save it, then I had this a few times where I saw that I thought it was burning. So I had hot water. It's kind of hard to do at the same time. I had to take, enough hot water, put it in a bowl, and then, make sure the bowl's dry so there's no water there to cook it, right? So then, you take the cholent pot, you hold on to it while it's on the counter, you pour the hot water in it, then you put it back, right? And that saved my cholent, right? I had to do it a few times. Now I got a crock pot, so it's easier. So it usually never burns. But if it's on the fire, it could burn, right? But what if you don't have hot water? Then you're stuck. Then there's nothing to do, right? Then, don't mitzvah to leave it, let it burn, right? Just take it off the fire, right? You take it off the fire. That's what you would do. Someone said, I think it's Jewish Heritage Day. Get together on Sunday, celebrate at the River Dogs baseball game. Is that wrong? Well, again, that's not surprising. Not surprising. Again, what's the issue? I had somebody tell me whatever, it was a number of years ago. They went to a candlelighting ceremony somewhere. I think it probably wasn't, but I thought it was in the parking lot of a stadium. Could have been the parking lot of a stadium. I could be wrong. Doesn't matter. But after they lit the candles, they went to a hockey game. Someone asked me my opinion on it, and I slaughtered them for it. Like, it goes against everything the Torah stands for. Like, you're doing exactly what the Greeks wanted you to do to watch these games. Yeah. So, yeah. So they want to, if they're doing this a Kiruv thing, they want to bring people closer, so they have like a Jewish event. They take them to this ball game. All right, the worst things to do. I think there are worse things to do. So, should a person go to it? I don't think so. But it's a social event. Okay. Again, for a woman, it doesn't really apply. But, if they're doing it as a Kiruv thing, which some places will do, and that was what, this group did, they went to a hockey game. It was right after candlelighting. Sometime after candlelighting, they went to a hockey game. That was the whole point. They had a religious thing, and then they go to a hockey game. Okay. But what does the hockey game represent? This is the whole thing I brought out, right? This is exactly what the Greeks wanted. Participate. Even if you're not doing it physically. You're watching it, you're being part of it. That's the whole problem. That's going in the ways of the Greeks. 100%. Not just to mention you're wasting time when you go to learn, but it doesn't apply to a woman, fine. Right? For a guy, but what if that's the only social event? So if they're doing it for Kiruv, I can hear. They're doing it for outreach, okay. Yeah, if that's the case. If that's the case, aren't there better things, try and find better things to do? I don't know, go to a park, in winter's going to be hard to do that, depending where you are. I don't know, do something less, less like that. But it's very hard because, you're surrounded by that, culture. You want to, I don't know, you're not going to watch Schindler's List all the time or, something like that. It'd be kind of depressing. Holocaust video or something, then have a discussion. Whatever, you gotta find, fun things to do that are gonna draw people. That are gonna draw people. Going to a ball game, a sporting event, that'll draw people. Right? So now you're asking, should I go? It's your choice. I wouldn't, the only social event a person can get to, that's the only way they can meet people, maybe. Right? But, I don't think these things are good, in general. But, it's just a total waste of time. Absolute waste of time. What type of fish is gefilte fish? Carp, usually. I think it's carp. I think they use carp for that. Whitefish. Maybe whitefish they use. Let me see. Let's see. Whitefish, carp. Okay. Usually whitefish or carp. That's what it is. It's not a sardine. It's usually whitefish. It's usually whitefish or carp, as they say. What does that mean? What does gefilte mean? What does gefilte mean? Good question. It's Yiddish. It means stuffed or filled. Yeah, so that's why they call it gefilte fish, because it's filled with basically you grind and debone it. You mix it with other ingredients and you fill it with onions, matzo meal, other things, back into the fish's skin before cooking it. Yeah, so it means stuffed fish. That's what it means. So gefilte means stuffed. It comes from the Yiddish word to stuff. That's where it comes from. Um, Whitefish is not pink fish. You don't use salmon for sure not. It's usually whitefish or carp. Yeah, it could be pike also potentially. So it's not sardines for sure not. No one makes gefilte fish out of sardines. So it's usually whitefish or carp. Yeah, because if you're gonna crush it up, it get totally destroyed. Is it a fishy taste? Yes. Um, what do you call it? Gefilte fish, very strong fish taste. No question. Sardines are kosher. I mean, yeah, you have to get kosher sardines, but they're definitely kosher, for sure, unless they're heated up and mixed with other things. But in general, raw sardines should be fine, because they have scales and fins. So that should not be an issue. Is it a fishy tasting fish? Yes. It depends what. All right. I'm gonna go there. You have a lot of social events, be part of things. Okay. Someone said you can't attend social events and then put a wedge between myself and the community. Depends. Depends what social events are. Sometimes there are events I would say, yeah, don't go. Just because it's social events, yeah, yeah, it's a problem, right? It's a problem because not all social events are created equal. Some could be better things for Judaism. Some things maybe parv, no pun intended. Other things maybe have a Jewish theme to it. Okay. Social events are important. I don't, that's how you meet people in the community. They are important again, but it depends. It depends what type, what type of events. I think there sometimes, there could be certainly better events. Um, but that is the way you meet people. People meet people, let's say, at a Kiddush on Shabbos. Our synagogues have Kiddush on Shabbos, so you meet people there also. But it's good to see people outside of Shabbos, right? See people in a social, um, see people on, a social thing. Someone says it's on Sunday. I understand it's on Sunday. I understood they're not going on Shabbos, even on Sunday. Even on Sunday. Again, I've seen the damage sports does, or potentially does. Yeah, if someone's into sport, it's just hard to get out of your system, right? So forget about desecrating Shabbos. I wasn't even, I wasn't speaking about that, but in your case, I understood that it was on Sunday. But again, I think any of these things are bad. I just think they're bad in general. Because of what it leads to. It can be very addictive. Very, very addictive. I can tell you, as a sports fan, it can be addictive. There's no question. It's not just like you leave a cold turkey, like, God forbid, person was addicted to heroin, then, you got to take them off cold turkey and their body's going to suffer and be racked in pain and this and that and have withdrawal. Okay. You take someone who's a sports fan, you take them off it for a day or two. They can't look up stats, other things, highlights, whatever. I also go, it's not the same withdrawal, obviously, but if someone was like, really addicted or addicted to anything, it could be that, it could be movies, it could be porn, it could be any number of things, right? The more a person does it, the more they're into it, the harder it is to stop. Is anything like that, right? But this is the lesser of many evils, right? People say, okay, so what's the big deal? What in the world is the big deal? So a person, so a person wants to watch and they see it, whatever. So it's not a problem of, it's not a problem of anything necessarily forbidden. The best we can say is maybe it's a waste of time. We shouldn't be there. Going the ways of non-Jews could be. Again, for a woman to be much less, much less of an issue. But could there be vulgarity there? Yes. Could there be immorality there? Could be. Way people are dressed, depending where they are. Yeah. There are a number of things. What if you didn't have any of those issues? So the best thing we can say is it's just a waste of time. But if that's the only way someone can meet other people and socialize, okay, so do it. I'm not advocating it. Certainly not having you won't get me to advocate it. I'm telling you what the best case scenario would be to say that it's forbidden. Yeah. And again, in the modern Orthodox world, they laugh at that. They laugh at that. And even if it's addictive, so what? Even if I enjoy doing it, also learn. Also find time to learn. I'll find time to do that also. Right? It's bad values, bad, it's bad all the way around. In general. Um it just gives people bad values, in general. At the end of the day, that when they lose, like I heard Rebbe blessed memory, speak about this, he's one of the Torah giants of the last generation, and he said a similar thing. It's I mean, in theory, he's right. If your team wins or loses or whatever, wherever you live, if you're a fan of that, of that city or whatever, what difference does it make? What difference does it make that, if they never won, and now they actually win something, they have a very good year, we get all excited and it's this and that and whatever. If you grow up like I did, grew up in Boston, they're winning championships left and right year after year, you get spoiled, that's for sure. 100%. You get spoiled, but if you live in a place where one of the most important things part of the city is a huge sports town, right? The huge sports town. If you're not on the bandwagon, it's people look at you kind of strange. Okay, Red Sox have broken your heart for years. Understand Patriots never did anything until Tom Brady came, so made them a dynasty, an absolute dynasty. Whatever. I grew up with the Celtics winning championships, so you're used to it. Used to it, and but it has an influence. It has an influence because every newscast wherever you are has 10 minute or 8 minute whatever it is. That goes into sports highlights. Team won, team didn't win, they traded somebody, they didn't trade somebody. Whatever. So in some places where they never win anything, the sports fans maybe of other places, okay, because their team always stinks. Very good. Yeah. If you grew up in a big time sports town, let's say LA, you say Boston, New York, Philadelphia, these type of places, they go crazy. They go absolutely crazy. And that's what it is. That they can break your hearts also. Tremendously break your hearts, Yeah, I went to a Super Bowl, saw the Patriots get demolished by the Bears 1985. They lost by 35 points. It was already pretty much over at halftime. Yeah, but thank God there was a team called Buffalo Bills. They lost even by a bigger spread. Yeah, imagine and this doesn't make any sense at all in some ways. Imagine a team gets to the finals, and they're playing for the championship, they get crushed, or even worse, they lose by a few points or whatever on a bad call or a bad throw, or then you drive yourself crazy. Why? Logically, you say, the refs blew it, they were paid off, they were, it can happen. It can happen, they make a bad call, whatever. Certainly could happen. But your team gets there and then something happens and they're expected to win and they blow it. Yeah. Or whatever, they choke or something happens, or why in the world in general, again, beating this subject to death over here, why in general should that really matter? At all. This is what Brenda said. Yeah. Why should it matter? Who cares? They won, they didn't win, because it's enjoyable. People love it. It takes, it gets their adrenaline going. They're into it, whatever. They're into all the things and what's going on behind the scenes and different things and the X's and O's and whatever. Yeah. Now, if you're never into sports, you wouldn't understand that. It wouldn't even be an issue. No one, they think you like came from Mars. Like, who cares? Who cares? They won, they didn't win. And if they win, then what? Kind of like, when the cat's chasing its tail and the catches the tail. Okay. So you run around screaming, partying, saying, we're number one, right? Then you make all these, say all these negative things about the other team and blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, if you think about it in realistic terms, the stupidest thing ever created. Yeah, that's what the Greeks wanted. Worship of the body, playing sport. Well, like, what's the big deal? What in the world's the big deal? Yeah. Again, anyone who knew me when I was a kid, they would say like, this is blasphemy. Like, how could you say, didn't you see game 7, championship against the Lakers, 1984? I was there. Yeah. I go to, City Hall and they celebrate. Yeah. Yeah. Big waste of time. Total waste of time. A few years ago, Celtics won the championship. Yeah. So they had 1.5 million people. Imagine 1.5 million people on a Sunday. It was very hot also. 1.5 million people to watch these guys on these duck boats, right? They have these whatever boats that go in the water and they go around also around the city. And they did it every time a team won, they would take the team around whatever, they would, in a certain area, however many miles it was. So people would come out and, like scream, say that they won the championship. 1.5 million people. There are people like get up at 6 in the morning to go. I mean, like really like Messias Nefesh, self-sacrifice over here. 1.5 million people. Now, if you think about it, they're all lined up, for like miles. And they're going to come on like a number of these duck boats, so you can wave to them or whatever, yell and scream, whatever. You're only going to see them for like 10 seconds, if that. 15 seconds. Yeah, depending where you are, where you're standing. Not to mention the fact that it's going to be pretty hot while you're there also. Yeah, and we can find a place to park and other whatever. 1.5 million people sat there once screaming at these people, saying like, they love them or whatever, and blah, blah, blah. 1.5 million people. 1.5 million people. That's a lot of people. A lot of people. Yeah, so people go crazy for sports. Yeah, but think about it. Imagine someone got like 3, 4, 5 hours of sleep. They get up early on a Sunday morning to do this. The self-sacrifice. That's self-sacrifice. Yeah. You can say it's stupid self-sacrifice. Okay, but self-sacrifice, yeah. Self-sacrifice. Some people some Jews have difficulty getting out of bed to go pray. But if they were going to go do this, oh yeah, they'd be up. They'd be up. That's important, right? If it's important enough, you do it. Yeah, it doesn't matter how much sleep you got or not. It's, you get adrenaline, you take a nap, whatever, right? It's being part of history. That's what people want. They want to be part of history. And again, yeah, in the bigger scheme of things, they win, they lose, they draw, whatever. Doesn't matter. It's entertaining. Can be entertaining. Yeah, can be a lot of fun. Yeah, people go to all these tailgate parties, right? So in football, people getting sloshed before they walk in the door, eating up a storm before they go in. Yeah, imagine 50,000 people. Now you got these games in January, depending where the games are, freezing cold, right? It could be like 10 degrees, or less. You got, and you got the stadium packed. You told me people dress warm, they'll probably drink a little bit so they won't feel the cold or whatever. 50,000 people, 40,000 people, whatever, they're going to pack the stadium. Pack the stadium. Some places nicer weather, okay. They're totally going to pack the stadium, for a football game. People say, like, you tell a sports fan that, it's like, you don't know what you're missing. You don't know what this is, I think the first time in 10 years they've ever gotten this far. It's like such a big thing for the city, regardless whether they win or lose. Yeah, but it's like 10 below zero. It's like freezing. What's a football game in November, October? Like freezing, if you don't dress properly. Yeah, but people say, what do you mean? Even if it is, you dress up, whatever. It's all part of the thing. You're there with 40,000, 50,000 other people. But imagine you're with all these people celebrating the same thing. 1.5 million people. Mind-boggling. We'll go on this for weeks after the Celtics had won it. It's mind-boggling. Not to mention the fact, other places where when they win, they like burn down the city. Gives an excuse to like burn down the city. And cause all kinds of vandalism, whatever. But people are into it. So if people are going to be, watching these things, non-Jews are going to be watching these things, and they're not going to be bothering Jews because they're all caught up in sports. That's not a bad thing. That's, a huge distraction. That's beautiful. So they're not bothering us. Yeah, so it's good, right? But in general, you're getting the best values from what some of these people say and what they do, and showmanship and upmanship and and other things. These are not like road scholars by any stretch. A lot of them. They're good at what they do, very good. They got good values. You want to emulate, you want your kids to emulate, but nobody cares. That's the irony. They're just going to tell you 100%. Again, while I'm on this rant, they're going to tell you 100%. I don't care what they do in the off season. I don't care how they treat their wives, their kids, or this or that. I want to see them play a game. I want to see them do this or do that or whatever. That's all I want to see. Now, some are more upstanding, have more upstanding character traits. Others less. I'm not gonna throw everyone under the bus. Yeah, but again, are these the values we want? Are these the people that should be emulated? No, 100%. These people should never be emulated. Just because they throw a ball or kick a ball. Yeah. Now you tell me. Let's say some of them are very philanthropic, and they do other good things. Okay, you can have that. Very good. They have all these different foundations, and they help, they help, kids and other things. Very good. Give a lot of money, let's say, to hospitals, different things. Okay. Yeah, I can hear that. That is beneficial. But is that who we want to emulate? These are the people we want to emulate. Someone told me Rabbi I once went to a ball game. Went to it was a football game actually. And he saw it, someone was like, let's say one of his heroes or whatever, but like, someone looked up to, we heard the person speak, you heard how he spoke, but that was it. That was it. Sports for them after that, just like finished. Finished. Yeah, that's how you speak, that's how you act. Like, if you're a Jew, you don't separate the two. You should never separate the two. You are the person. How you act, what you say, what you do. Yeah, and if you're on the stage, so to speak, maybe the people see you, you got much greater responsibility. Much, much greater responsibility. And some of these people don't care. They just don't care. And day in and day out, they're going to get critiqued, and they get reporters saying, how come, you missed that ball? What happened? What happened during that play? It's all Lashon Hara also. Total Lashon Hara. And someone's going to, you can throw the quarterback under the bus. No pun intended. Well, the ball was behind me. What could I do? I tried. I got hit and whatever. Got intercepted or he fumbled or, whatever. But that's, reporters ask all these questions. It's all Lashon Hara. What do you think the most important thing is? And you're looking out for the other person. Like, they throw out all these questions. 99% of it's all Lashon Hara. Speaking about other people. Speaking badly about other people. And that's bad. Yeah, so I had somebody who played semi-professional, basketball in Europe and here, whatever. So I asked them, I said, I'm just curious, what was it like being around these guys, traveling with them, being in the locker room with them? And he says, I'm not talking. I was like, these are the stories I want to hear. I was like, what do you mean you're not talking? He's like, we're not going there. I'm like, come on, just give me a snippet. He's like, so the person told me, use your imagination. I said, I could use my imagination. I don't want to use my imagination. I want to know what happened. He said, if you know what people are up to, what they're thinking about, what they're talking about, then you know. I don't have to tell you. I was like, come on, don't you have any good stories? I'm not talking. I didn't get it out of them. I think, now some people would say maybe it's not so bad. Maybe some people are better, whatever. People talk about whatever they talk about. Just because, they're good at sports or whatever, doesn't mean they're moral by any stretch. Doesn't mean they don't curse. Doesn't mean, they don't talk about other things. Right? Let's say. But I asked this person, I said, now you know what you know. Yeah, and now you're a totally different person. I said, I guarantee you probably, as much as you would want to, you probably don't, but even if you wanted to, you can never walk back in that locker room again. You can never speak to these people again, almost. He says, yeah, it's true. Yeah, because if you have, if there's nothing guarding you, if no anchor, so to speak, then it's a whole different thing. Right? But the values, I think these values that, people are going to be talking about, whatever. And again, most people don't care. Right? They don't care over here. That's the problem. And you're surrounded by it. So when you're surrounded by it, you hear it, right? It has an effect. Um, um, yeah, I'll take some other questions here. 1 second. If a person plays a game, that I understand. Person's competitive, very good. That I can hear. They played. They have a part in it, so to speak. Most people who don't play, or maybe were never that good, or whatever. Okay. But it's the problem is it's something that never disappears. That is, that is, that's the problem. It never disappears. Yeah, and it's a major distraction, especially a person lives in a city where that's that's the that's the main thing. Um, someone told me one of the last teams in the in the playoffs now is the Bears in Chicago. They haven't played, I think, I don't think they played for a championship game, or well, they're not quite there yet. But whatever, if they win this game, I guess someone told me they go to the championship. Very good championship game for the Super Bowl. They haven't been in it for years, for many years. Chicago, big sports, sports place, probably going crazy over there. Going out of their minds. They're like, see what they do. Okay. But, at the end of the day, the bigger the place, the hard, it becomes part of you, right? Absolutely becomes part of you, and it's seasonal with every different sport. And sometimes brothers will say they like this sport better than that one. Okay. Whatever it is, whatever it is. But, I would say beyond the shadow of a doubt, it's addictive. There's no, it's totally, it's totally addictive. And a person goes to a game, imagine what you hear. And there are kids there also. It's not like, not that, they're just adults. And the way people talk and the way they scream and they do other, I can think of 100,000 things of what's bad, right? What's bad or whatever, from it. And even if you bring it up to people, they may agree with you. They may 100% agree with you, but in the bigger scheme of things, it doesn't matter, right? Why are they there? They're there for one reason. They're there rooting on their team. That's why they're there. Tell me there's immorality, the way people are dressed, the vulgarity, the way people. Okay, but that's the way people speak anyway. So that's the way people dress a lot anyway. So it's in this type of setting. What's the big deal? Oh, someone talks about the Seattle Seahawks. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Someone told me also. Someone a big Seahawks fan. They haven't been in it for many years. They're going absolutely. They're going absolutely bananas. They're going out. So you got teams that are like big. Players that are big sports fans. And the team hasn't done anything for a long time. They get there, or they're in the mix or whatever. They're very close. That's the whole place goes bananas. Yeah. I'm just saying, I can understand it because I grew up with it. So I can understand it, but think about it logically. Logically, as Rebbe said, who cares? They win, they lose, they don't, they this, or that. But anyway, back to our point. What the Kli Yakar over here says right? Let's just finish up with what he says over here. Right? He says over here that, yeah, you need an extra guarding. When it comes to laws that don't make sense, you need an extra guarding, right? And just like an evil person wants to destroy people, who keep mitzvahs or sacrificial service they want to destroy. So the extra guarding over here is against people who want to take away from enjoyment of doing the mitzvahs. Why? Because they're going to come up with 1.5 million excuses. The main excuse is, why are you going to keep these laws that don't make sense? Why did God say you can't eat pig? I don't know. He says you can't eat pig. Yeah. Or mixing wool and linen. Yeah. So the nations will say, come on. Like, you're going to keep things that don't make sense? You're going to do all these things that don't make sense? So what are they trying to do? They're trying to weaken your resolve. We'll see. The Or Chaim HaKadosh, of blessed memory, is going to say that, what's going to happen, once the person, I spoke about this in Pirkei Avos, what's going to happen when a person, after they do the mitzvah, are they going to get cooled off? Right? They're going to get cooled off, or not? Or they're going to still stay excited, after they do the mitzvah. So if a person is not in tune and they get distracted, and there are things that logically don't make sense, it can weaken a person's resolve, right? That's what it can do. So he says that's why, that's what the Kliyakar over here says, that a person, their resolve over here, when it talks about mitzvahs that don't make sense, you need extra guarding. You need a lot more extra guarding because everyone around you is going to say you don't need to do it. It doesn't make sense. Why would you even do it? A lot of these things don't make sense, and that's why you need an extra guarding. Well, we mentioned extra guarding also comes, as we said before, as we mentioned last week, about trampling on mitzvahs that are light, that are looked at as light in our eyes. No death penalty, you did it, you didn't do it, whatever, right? So they're light in our eyes. So something that's more severe, you tell me, we're much more careful with. Very good. We're much more careful. Okay. And things we trample on, we're not as careful with. Okay, I did it, I didn't do it. But Rabbeinu Yonah says every positive command has to do with resurrection of the dead. Okay, you didn't put on tefillin today, big deal. Gonna weaken your soul component, so to speak. Comes to resurrection of the dead. Speak about that with the Or Chaim HaKadosh next week, most likely. Yeah, but needs extra guarding over here because everyone's going to make fun. Everyone's going to say, come on, you really think God doesn't want you to rip toilet paper on Shabbos? You really think he cares? I don't know. It says death penalty if you don't get it right. Yeah, but you really think, come on, is pork really that bad? No, eating a bug is worse, right? 5, 6 prohibitions to one shot, that's definitely worse. Okay. They have a lot of things that can cool us down. Right? But he's telling you over here, you need the extra guarding specifically on things that don't make sense. Because then everyone and their mother's going to come out and say, come on, don't think it's so bad. Don't get caught up in it, this, that. Why? It'll weaken your resolve. Because you don't have an answer. You say, you're just going to tell me God said it and we do it. Yeah, that's the reason. Doesn't mean it's the only reason. Yeah, we can try and find reasons for it. Okay. We have an obligation to try and understand to the best of our ability. As we always say. Very good. What's the issue, though? They're going to make you think. Maybe there isn't a reason. You're right. It doesn't make sense. When a person's strong and they're resolved, they're not going to care. They're not going to care. You're going to stick to your guns, right? You're going to be strong. And you're going to do what you need to do. But the problem is when you let your guard down, that's the problem. When you let your guard down and you let your boundaries down, so to speak, and you justify what you do, which we always do, right? The repercussions could be catastrophic. Could be absolutely catastrophic. And then a person's doing things over and over and over again, and that becomes part of your psyche. Once it becomes part of your psyche, it's very hard to stop. It's extremely hard, not impossible, but it's very hard to stop. Right, as we said before. My father, blessed memory, I'll end with this, unless there are any other questions. He told me, many years ago, that that, when I was growing up, so I was 7 when they went to the World Series, 1975. They lost it to the Cincinnati Reds, whatever. 6 games, 7 games, 7 games. But after that, they never really did anything, for a long time. And then came 1986, they blew it against the Mets, when I was in New York, and they should have won, whatever. Anyway, my father, bless his memory, said that they had one of the longest times they didn't win the World Series, right? Since 1918. The only team that was longer was the Chicago Cubs in 1917. See, look at all this great knowledge I have. Yeah. They finally won it. They finally won it all. Yeah, 2004, right? They won it for the first time in 87 years. A big drought. 87 years. Yeah, for them to win. It's what happens when you trade. Someone wrote a book called The Curse of the Bambino. When they traded Babe Ruth, they traded the major superstar to be or whatever. Any case, they won in 2004, and then they won it 2 other times before my father passed away. He said it was a big thing that they won it once. He said, I never would have thought in my lifetime I would have seen them won it. They won it 3 times, right? So I said, okay, you can say the same thing about the Patriots. They were a doormat. They never did anything. I mean, okay, they went to the Super Bowl twice. Yeah, once in 86, once I think in 90 something, 92, 94, whatever it was. And they lost both times, but they got killed against the Bears. And then Tom Brady came along and they became a dynasty for 20 years, which no one will ever surpass. I can't imagine. Right? But they were doormats, they were nothing. Yeah, they become became an absolute, an absolute dynasty. Yeah. So okay. People still go crazy for everything. That's what it is. But the thing is, it's like part of you. It's like people have heart attacks watching these things. I'm not even saying you bet on the games. You can have heart attacks watching these things. They're up, they're down, they're up, they're down. They're they lose in the last second, and then people throw the TV out the window, or they just got rip roaring mad because someone made an error and the game's over, and they just blew the game and whatever. People get very emotionally attached, extremely emotionally attached. It's a game. Okay, they make a lot of money. So, some of these, stadiums, whatever, they make tons of money. They sell out the stadium, some more, some less, whatever. Bigger marketplaces, they're, charging up the gazooter for a ticket. It's crazy. I'll give another example. I don't know, keep talking about this, but, 1984 when they won the Celtics won the championship. 1984, we had season tickets for years. We had season tickets for about 50 years more. Half court seats, right? Best seats in the house. Yeah, the tickets back then in 1984, I remember, were $32. $32 for a seat. These are like $500 a seat at least right now. So I remember in 1984, my father told me we could scalp the tickets, made $1,000. He said, we'll watch it at home. I was like, we're not watching the game at home. I said, were you crazy? I was 15 years old. I said, you got an opportunity to see them win it? Come on. He said, I'll give you the money. I was like, we got to go to the game. I got to, convince them. We went, and, the rest is history. But it becomes part of you. Absolutely becomes part of you. And so you see, it's all coming out, right? Patriots going to win today by 2 touchdowns. Who knows? Right? Whatever it's going to be. Yeah. In the bigger scheme of things, all the things is a big zero. The big zero. Right? I say all the time, no offense to all these great rabbis and, whatever. If I didn't have all this knowledge and wasted time, who knows what, I could have been, or who knows what. It's a waste. All that knowledge for what? For what? But that's what but that's the effect. That's the effect it has, right? And if a person, worked on themselves, and they find out, they don't follow this anymore, whatever, they find out that the team won and it didn't affect them, then they won. Then they overcame. Then they were able to overcome it. It's extremely hard, right? Extremely hard. And there are people that hate other people because, they're just on the opposite side. You think, anyone in Boston likes LA? In basketball? Never. Never. Yeah, you think, Red Sox, Yankees, rivalry? That's what it is. You just hate the other side because you hate the other side. and what they've done over the years and whatever. That's what it is. Yeah, not rational. They'll say it's rational, whatever, but like, all these things, bottom line here, all these things do not make you closer to God. That's the bottom line. It's interesting, it may be exciting, and all that. But what does it do? It takes you 10 steps, 50 steps away from God. But again, someone will say that should be the worst thing anyone ever does, right? Should be the worst thing. Every year, every year in Purim. So I ask everyone there all kinds of different funny questions. And so as I said before, my daughter and one of my daughters and son-in-law they're they are the dorm councils of of yeshiva. So my son-in-law always says no matter how much they try and get me into sports, like it's just never gonna happen. Like it's just not into sports, whatever. Right. So one of the questions he normally gets is, okay, who, so I'll give him four scenarios. Who played in the Super Bowl this year? These two teams, these it's like, I don't know, and I don't care. It's like, okay, so we'll drink to that. Right. So, there are people like never into it, there are people more into it. It's in a certain way, and people will tell me it's blasphemy saying it's like a disease. It's like a fix that people have, right? How Levi, a person would have that kind of fix when it comes to Torah, and they'd love Torah that much that nothing else matters, and all these things they win, they lose, whatever. It's all irrelevant. In the bigger scheme of things, it's all irrelevant. But someone's going to tell me, but Rabbi, isn't it fun? Fun. I'm not going to say not. 100%. Not going to say, it's not fun and interesting, especially if things been there, whatever. Yeah. But in the bigger scheme of things, what does it do? It takes you away. It's a major distraction. It never should be. Yeah. It's, like my father would say, that I had a love-hate relationship with the Red Sox. Yeah. It's like they break your heart. Like just totally break your heart. When you think, they're about to do something, whatever, bam. It's just, years it's been that way. It's been, I was saying, many years ago when I was growing up, they never did anything. When I was growing up. But also, they almost won it the most amount of times in the 21st century, which is crazy. It's crazy, kind of think of it. Or 4 times, 5 times, whatever, 4 times. It's like totally. So I told someone, all right, I'll end with this. After the Red Sox won the World Series for the first time, I told a friend of mine, I also grew up in Boston. So I told his son, I said, listen, the Red Sox won after 87 years. Mashiach's coming. Mashiach's right around the corner. The Red Sox won. So a few days later, a week later, it's like, okay, so where's Mashiach? I said, listen, it took the Red Sox a long time to win the World Series. Mashiach's right around the corner. Takes time, right? It took 87 years. You got to give Mashiach a little bit of slack. Anyway, on that positive note, I'm gonna stop there. I do this every Sunday, 9 o'clock Eastern time, 4 o'clock Israel time. Anyone has any questions? Find me on Facebook at Michael Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There you get videos, Q&As, Ethics of Our Fathers, Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBI, CHAIM, COFFMAN @gmail.com, whichever goods. Beginning